right here.
I see if I could plug it in.
Okay, give that a go. And we want to use a PC to do that.
So basically, get two. Can we get two?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. Yes, we're just trying to figure this out.
So you just need to select House PC from the options at the top of the screen.
Okay, I pushed on that and now hit presentation.
Yes.
Okay, nothing is happening. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing. Then I'm going to hit House PC.
Have you got it in the right place?
Do I have it as in what is it?
Like the drive.
Yep.
She believes so, but we can't get to the desktop.
You'll need to, I believe, exit.
I don't want to shut down, do I?
If you, I'll have to hang up and figure out.
Say again.
Yeah, I was about to ask.
Yep. These are all good questions, and I'm willing to entertain them. So, thank you. I don't think it is.
Because this looks like your desktop screen here. Interesting. Okay, you've got everything open. Sorry. No, I had this one. That's where my flash showed this one in, but I'll see.
I was trying to get my phone so we could use the light because it's very dark. Okay, here we go.
Let me turn some lights on for you.
Hello, how are you?
Oh, here we go, right there.
Right now.
Yeah, so the computer was not on. Good problem solving. Okay.
It's coming up now and you'll get your desktop in a minute.
Thank you.
Do you want that to be larger? Oh, you've got your call open there, so you probably can't talk about that.
Well, we probably do need to be larger. No, I think we can. We can do that. Yeah. Later, a couple very helpful attendees have troubleshooted for us, and we are on our way to success. I probably just jinxed us right there, so now we're doomed. But
We speak from experience. On the same thing.
thank you.
I was going to say, what's the troubleshooting?
I'm going to pass the sign-in around, and the only reason we're doing that is if you want us to tick it off, we're in the portal, staff development portal, so you get credit for having been here. So that's what the purpose of that is. Oh, I need to log in first. Oh, no, I probably don't. Are you going out to the internet at all?
No.
Oh, then you're fine. Sorry.
That's fine. I just need to get to...
We double click on that when it open up. Show you the.
Oh, there we go.
I realize I just troubleshooted a Windows machine, which is just amazing. It's very blurry,
It is, but...
even with my glasses.
What is that saying? Oh, it's time to...
Oh, here. PowerPoint found a problem with something. An attempt to.
Yeah. Can't read. Uh-oh. All right. Well, we may have to go off to something else. Hang on.
Do you want to plug in your laptop? We can plug
Yeah, I
in the
might have
laptop.
to. Let
and
me
use that.
try if this version. Not sure why it's showing two kinds. Let's see if that works better. Good, yeah.
I like
That
that
looks
one.
better. Does that look like the right one? Maybe.
This is a quick preview.
Yeah.
It's a teaser. It's a teaser.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something like function right here. Yeah, it's good.
All right.
There we go.
All right. So do we want to put it on the full?
Oh, yeah, we
In
can.
the-
I can start.
All right.
Never
Good
had.
morning. Welcome to those on the Gold Coast and those here at Nathan. Can you hear us? Yes?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Okay, wonderful. I know Layla has the sign-in sheet. The reason for that is if you sign off, then we'll just put it into the portal that you attended. We're not being the attendance police, but if you wanted the portal that you participated, go ahead and sign that off. We do appreciate you coming to spend this hour with us. I am quite excited to have Dr. Laura Turchi here. She's an assistant professor at University of Houston, but I know her as a colleague and friend from Arizona State University. So that is the university where I was prior to coming to Griffith. And that's where Laura and I worked on a U.S. Department of Education grant that the Teachers College was awarded, a 5-year grant that we both worked on in different capacities, but collaborating mostly on the educational technology support side. So Laura is a teacher educator specializing in English language arts. She has done a lot of work, including the publishing of a book, Teaching Shakespeare with Purpose, a student-centered approach, with her colleague Ayanna Thompson. That is not what she's here to talk about today. If you had a bit of a, you could talk about it. In fact, that's what brought her over to Australia. She was just down at the University of Sydney. Steve, that's about Southern accent at the University of Sydney, keynoting a conference on teaching Shakespeare. So we're glad to be able to take advantage of her. I said, oh, you're going to be here? Let's get you to come on up. But what she's talking about today, and actually in the scope that I work with her, is a collaborative project. And this particular project is a collaboration with her colleagues on data-based research and the idea of collaborative design of courses. Now, to me, when we were talking about this, how it fits in nicely with the BLE work we're doing and the idea that we're transforming our courses as we move across that. Many of you may have provided feedback on the new course design standards that Deborah Henley sent out. So you can see that we're trying to do that uplift. And what I was very excited about is looking at different models for doing that and how we might accomplish that transformation, but in a collaborative way. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Laura, and I look forward to learning along with you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Can you please flip the camera to be on you and Laura?
I will give it a go. So Laura, you can start talking, and I will see what I can do. All right.
I think you might need the microphone so they can hear you.
So I may need to stand there. Yeah, that's fine. Oh,
It's a good thing we have all these wonderful academics in the room who are helping us. Thank you so, so very much. Truly, truly. So,
I'm sorry, I don't have a.
is that better?
Yep.
Okay. So I've got it so it's showing her right there. So then now we need to do the audio. Ready, Mike? Okay.
Like now? Oh, just about, yeah, is that one? That one, where's that?
We're trying to put on a mic, as you can probably see, so you might be able to hear her better.
And also, can go press mute at all because we're getting a lot of feedback.
So probably once we make sure that they can hear us, we will do just that. Thank you, Chris. Okay.
Thanks.
So, how is that for your sound and for anyone else's sound?
Perfect.
Oh,
Excellent.
perfect for them. It's good. Perfect is good. How's that? You might listen to this. How's it for whom? For you? Yeah, it's good. Can't tell if you're actually hearing it mic'd or not, but it's good. Can you guys at place here?
Yes.
Yeah. If that isn't working, I just. Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. Yeah. 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 Sure. Okay, so thank you. And yeah, I can do a lot on Shakespeare, but I will spare you all of that, although I'm pretty good at it. I'm pretty good at talking about it. But as Dr. Blair has said, we have a history together. Some of that history is relevant for this talk today. I've had a number of different roles in academic and scholarly work, and some of that will play out. I mean, I'll discuss through my slides some of that information, and then basically I'm going to offer you a sort of case, a case of using design-based research, what it did for a group of faculty who were in a bunch of different roles. Some of the technology we integrated, but I'm not really from a tech standpoint so much as those were tools that were relevant to us. And I'm happy to take questions at any point, especially if I'm speaking English where like the words are, you know the words and yet they don't line up with your experience, because I've discovered, and it is particularly discovered in Sydney, what a range of vocabulary we use for a lot of similar things. And so rather than pretending that we're speaking the same language, at some point you may just need to say, hey, stop, let's try again. Are you going to try to mute goalpost or whatever? Is that you hearing all that?
Can you mute the microphone down there, Layla? Thank you.
Yeah. And they can hear me slurping or whatever. And I purposely used the word rejuvenate in my title, trying to think about making things new again, which is the blessing of teaching in my experience, is that you get to try new things all the time. Transformative or thoughtful transformation is more complicated, whether one is choosing a transformation or being transformed upon, or what are some of the other verbs you might use. And I think we've probably all shared different experiences like that, and some of what I'll show today, some of the things in my experience with design-based research are complicated, because even deciding who's making what decisions about what changes are going to happen really complicate change processes, which isn't surprising, but what you'll see examples of in this here. And let's see if I can just do this easily. No? There we go. We'll see how bad that is. So basically, I'm going to focus on the idea of design-based research, although I would not hold myself up as an expert of design-based research, more of a veteran of design-based research, and I'll explain some of what that means. But it is fair to see it as a way of talking about if not complexity, at least complex relationships and how they inform, good people's work together and change together. So the important things about design-based research, one is that it is intended to capture change or capture improvement in real-world environments. The assumption is that there are many dependent variables, that some of the variables are not known when you begin the work, which is to say you're flying blind to some extent, and this is a process that assumes that's true, that you are flying blind during some of what you're doing, and that there are flexible procedures that evolve over time that allow lots of social interactions between participants who are in different roles. So if that sounds sort of wildly inclusive of many different processes, it is. And that's probably, again, a blessing and a curse of design-based research, or at least in my experience of it. But I do see the tools of design-based research as being meaningful, and the same tools have been meaningful throughout my higher education experience and some of the work that I've done. So I am going to offer one case of DBR, one case of design-based research. I'm going to give you a short history of of some of my other professional background with this. I want to talk about design-based research in theory. I want to talk about design-based research in practice, although ideally design-based research actually would include both of that, and I'll talk some about what we discovered. There is a very fine website with lots of links and resources. This is the home page here. Those are the, that's how to get to it. The model that's referenced here is a model I'm going to be using too from Tom Reeves. And overall, the idea is to share some experiences with design-based research to see if it's useful, if the tools that it shows are useful to you. So in my, like I said, a short personal history, I need to say that I was in some ways enculturated to higher education in the United States at a very tiny, small private liberal arts college. Again, U.S. terminology, college is undergraduate. So it's an undergraduate, primarily teaching-focused institution where I was the director of teacher education for about 12 years. And it's an interesting place. It's called Warren Wilson College. It's again, an undergraduate institution in the mountains of North Carolina, and it is a place full of very independent and autonomous faculty. It's very small. Everyone wears many hats and gets to make many decisions and do a lot, pretty much do as they will, which is fun at a small scale. Whoops, that's not me. Anyway, the students generally expect very individualized pathways. It's again, as a small private college, it's quite innovative in some ways. But as a teacher education faculty and then teacher education director, we had to deal with increasing external accreditation requirements, and so more and more people from the outside of our happy little home in the mountains had the right to tell us what to do, basically, or how to do our work, because we wanted to be accredited, because we wanted to be able to provide teacher certification recommendations to the state. Again, I'm speaking the jargon of U.S. teacher education, so forgive me if that sounds like language you know and maybe isn't entirely clear. But the external pressures were such that we had to come up with some answers, and collaboratively in that situation, our answer to having a lot of individualized student interests and a lot of external requirements was to create a culminating project of student-gathered evidence. So we put up the sort of standards for what they needed to accomplish, and then we allowed students to find many different pathways for it. And that was a good solution and a good collaborative solution to what was otherwise a feeling of having not quite Big Brother looking down on us, but a very strong set of requirements that we had to push back against in order to maintain our own identity. Another example is the one that Heidi Blair just described to you. I went from a tiny, tiny college, to a gigantic public university, and then got involved with a gigantic new initiative, which was called, it was called ASU Next. It was called a couple of different things, but it was a massive reform movement within the university, the Arizona State University, and it was, and I was involved in one part of it, which was related to higher education reform in service of teacher education. And again, I realize some of this is going to sound very alien, but in the U.S. system, undergraduates, especially at state universities, must complete a certain number of core requirements, which might in another place be considered liberal arts requirements or other general studies requirements. And I realize those are not typical in the Australian system. But what happens is then, as students complete these core requirements in their first or second year of being at the university, different majors, different programs have them if you will, navigate or choose within all the different courses that they could be taking, specific ones. We target certain ones, and in my case, we were working on ones that we thought future teachers needed to take. And so those were kind of targeted pathways within many electives. And what we did was to try to reform those early pathways of teachers, even though we didn't have very much control over what the course selections were. And in order to improve that teacher preparation and the teacher's knowledge of like I said, some core subjects as defined by the U.S. system, we chose a kind of shared value or a shared slogan, but one which we aspired to, which was the idea that great learners make great teachers. And so we had a lot of shared purpose across all of these different subject areas, because there are 5 core subject areas that we were addressing: sciences, mathematics, English, language arts and literacy, history, social studies, and the arts. And we needed to help students navigate through all of that coursework in order to get ready to be teachers. And we needed to, using this new monies that had come in, reform all of those courses. And so, whereas in the first example I gave you, people were working together to have students gather evidence of what they had learned based on the pathways they had chosen. Now, in this case, we had to redesign the courses themselves, and so our tool for doing that was a collaborative rubric, a very extensive rubric that I outlined what were the qualities that we wanted the new classes to have, and then that rubric allowed us to assess the new courses as they came online and guide them, guide instructors and to start to look at whether they were making any difference at all. So again, working collaboratively, finding different tools that allowed us to improve, to transform what was going on in our particular context. And so all of these experiences, of course, informed what eventually became my experience with design-based research. So now, I'm at Houston and at the University of Houston, and the University of Houston is a very significantly diverse place, which is exciting in terms of, I think, 143 different nationalities and languages represented in the city, and then represented in our college, in our university. And this is the case that I want to talk about in some detail, so you get some sense of it. But now talking about a different large public university, one that had a very ambitious research agenda, has a very ambitious research agenda, and which took on an external partnership. And so again, looked to do transformative things, try new ideas out, but within a context that was specific, in this case, to Houston and this particular university. And so the Houston partnership that University of Houston joined in a partnership with an organization called US Prep, which is Gates funded and other funding. So you may know that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I believe, has to give away $1 million a day, if I remember the numbers correctly. They have so much money, and they so need to spend it in order to function as a foundation, that I hate to say, but I think US Prep only got $47 million or something, but relatively a pittance compared to other dollars. But anyway, US Prep is a national organization in the United States, actually founded by a dean that both Heidi and I worked for at Arizona State, and it's trying to understand teacher education and how we create new teachers in the United States. But it does not only assume that universities it doesn't assume that universities are the only places where teacher education can happen. And that becomes important as you think about design-based research and our experiences, because we weren't only gathering data for our own purposes, but we were also, as a group, trying to gather data and think about the design of our courses in order to feed information into US Prep, and in doing that, help make the case for university-based teacher preparation. So our audience was both ourselves and our students, our desire to make things better, to transform, to be to better prepare teachers, but also to have students have a powerful learning experience. But we also needed to think about the ways that what we said about our practice and what we said about the quality of our institution could help to make a national case for why we should maybe not exist, but why it's valuable to do teacher preparation in the university, at the university level. Even if you are not particularly focused on teacher preparation, which is fine, it's a crazy business as it is, but what I hope you can hear in the context that I'm giving you is that we are thinking about how does the university prove its worth and viability in a market-driven world, in a world that has so many comments to make about whether there even is a value in university education. And so, again, my part of the story is teacher preparation trying to make its case. But in the U.S. anyway, I would say there's a general question about, like, what is the value of teacher preparation? What is the value of a university education? To what extent should it just be a conduit into jobs? And if it isn't that, what is its role? What is its purpose? So this is apparently any moment now. That is one of the topics that the U.S. president is going to speak at a major speech now, more or less. Last night, I'm still in another time zone, but
you guys were busy.
yes, and I don't really. Personally, I'm not feeling too bad about missing it. But apparently, this idea of vocational education is going to be one of his themes, which is interesting because often it's used as a market-driven idea about what we should do with our children, as opposed to other values that we might have. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what US Prep asked us to do within our particular teacher prep organization. One tool that US Prep asked us to use was the design-based research, which I'm going to discuss. And also, the particular course that I'm going to talk about is an Introduction to Teaching course. And the only reason why that matters in this case is that you should know that it is not a field-based course. So we're not, in my talk now, I'm not going to talk to you about the complexity about what happens when you raise up a teacher and then stick him or her out in a school and see what happens, and then how you have to collaborate with those other stakeholders, those other teachers in the other schools world that we help the teachers enter. That's all really powerful stuff to know about, but in this case, the design-based research we were doing was solely focused on a higher education course, and it was solely focused on what we had, our available content, the expectations that we were supposed to be contributing to an overall program, and what happened. And so I think it is relevant across different fields. Almost no matter what you teach, if someone else has ideas about what you should include in your course, and someone else has ideas about what the quality of your course should be or how it should be delivered, then this is relevant. You'll see. I hope you'll see how it is relevant. So what we had when we embarked upon the US Prep program, and what I would say what we had generally is, and what is also true of the U.S. situation often in higher education, is we had a common language of standards, a common language for what should happen in our course, but very few common assessments or agreed upon measures, and that's very typical. The final product, if you will, is very much determined by the individual faculty. We did know that our program was perceived externally as insufficiently rigorous, I think teacher preparation, as far as I can tell across the galaxy, is perceived always as never quite enough. No one ever thinks that people are fully ready for when they when they go into teaching. So that's, I would say it's normal. We were being, even though, I mean, it's interesting, right? You get, on the one hand, you know what the press says about what your work is or whatever, and then at the same time, our programs won a number of awards and been recognized for all sorts of innovation, but it's never enough, right? The teachers are never quite good enough then when they go out into the schools. And so we also had to think a lot about our program transformation evidence options. Again, because this was being pushed, this project was being pushed by Gates, and which is looking at a lot of data-rich ideas. And generally speaking, at the overall teacher education program level, there were two kinds of evidence that seem to, complicated, but two kinds of evidence that were going to be worth talking about. One was student performance in the course and beyond, which gets called in shorthand knowledge, skills, and dispositions. So in my case, knowledge, skills, and dispositions for teaching. And so we had to both think about what we could know about our students' performance in our particular course, and then also by the time they finished the overall program of study. And then we also realized that there was a huge amount of data and things we needed to learn from student perspectives. Their motivation for being in a course, their perceived value of what they were learning, the perceived value of what they were learning, and even their identity as students and how that was developing through our work. So there are, if you will, soft measures as well as student performance measures that we were really interested in terms of program transformation. The great question, I'm not sure this has been answered, but the kind of open question for doing this kind of work is the aggregate of student data over time the equivalent of program quality? Right? Are we going to say, oh, XXXX, these are the performance measures, and if we add those up and aggregate them, then we know, okay, that's a good program, or that's good quality. And those are, I would say that to some extent those are fighting words, because there are lots of opinions on how to judge a program or how to judge overall quality for students. And that leads us to the question of where can or should transformative change happen? Where are the differences coming in? So some of the tools for collaborative change, which we knew we were going to take on, are here. And you'll notice communication tools are currently very high-tech, or can be very high-tech, but basically we needed to think about connecting people from face-to-face commitments that they were going to make to being together, as well as online coordination of different kinds. We're looking at evidence tools. What were the things that were going to allow us to capture what had been decided? Like, what record do we have of what we've been decided, and what are the consequences of those decisions? And then we were looking for process tools, or thinking about process tools in any kind of change or transformation, guiding, and in order to guide and name our efforts, which is how we get to design-based research in this case. But you may have seen any of these other names: reflective practice, design-based research, collaborative action research, improvement science, self-study. These all share some very common characteristics. We could probably come up with a list of some other names for other ones, but these are all sort of hot topic process tools, at least in the US, for talking about how you change or what causes change. Some of them have more history than others. Improvement science is is kind of a very hot topic right now, and design-based research is often seen as a part of improvement science. And then self-study initiatives are often much more faculty begun, where people are really working to understand their own process and their own values. So those come in. Those are all of these are tools for collaborative change. Again, what we ended up with through US Prep and what our groups, as you'll see, our own background in, was design-based research. And I'm going to go through the topics here in more detail. But this is from Reeves in 2006, and it's you can see a cyclical, or at least I hope the graphic here suggests that the kind of like the T.S. Eliot line, right? We know where we've begun to, when we find the beginning, we'll know it, the place for the first time. Sorry, that's a bad pricey of that poem, but to know the place where you began for the first time is to get back to the beginning and start over again. So if you have issues with eternal loops or other things, you maybe want to avert your gaze for a minute, because this does not end with a sort of product that's sort of perfect or whatever. It's just an ongoing cycle and reiteration, which to me is sort of heartening. It has to do with what college and all teaching is like, but it isn't pretty. It doesn't end up with perfectly packaged information. So given all of that background that I've been suggesting, all the different things that I had experienced, all the different collaborative research and collaborative endeavors I'd been a part of, and also knowing a little bit about design-based research and what it was going to offer us, we said, we being a team of teachers within a broader program, said yes to being part of an early DBR implementation project. And we discovered that we didn't have a particularly shared language about what we thought we were signing on to and what the US Prep Group was going to use. And a good part of this story is really about, can we find common language? Are there ways to go after a common understanding of what we want and how that might help us to transform into what we want to be? So whereas, like I said, we as a team were looking at this kind of iterative process and a lot of feedback and refinement, we discovered that US Prep really wanted design-based work to happen in order to generate data, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it was a very different thing from where we began. They were interested in us taking on a module structure, so we needed to rethink our coursework in some ways in order to deliver, organize the material a little differently. There was an enormous interest in pre and post testing, so as to know what students knew at the beginning of a given amount of time and then what they knew at the end based on our interventions. And that was partly because US Prep needed to report data across different sites. They wanted to see teacher education programs literally across the US that were doing different activities and gathering data about it and talking about the impact on students, and they wanted to know whether that data was going to show consistent improvement, whether things were transforming, whether good things were happening as a result of the work together. Again, and you'll hear this throughout, I think, as I'm talking about this, we being a team of educators working together within a program, wanted US Prep to help us make the case for what was important about our program and the value of teacher education, but we had ideas about how one might do that, or what the qualities might, how we might express the different qualities of our work. But the US Prep model was much more about, yes, we know you're good, but we need data from here and here and here and here so that we can put the data together and then make the case for teacher, in this case, for teacher preparation to outside stakeholders. And so that sort of tension between what the outside world wanted and what we wanted as a team, it was complicated, and was complicated from early on. And I would say design-based research helped us solve some of those tensions, because it allowed us to at least name what was going on. Like, we needed to do these things because we felt this was right for our students and to meet the standards we were trying to meet. And at the same time, we understood why we had to do further data collection in order to help make the broader case. So very complicated stuff. This is the ongoing team, although it changes rather regularly. And not just because we all get old from trying out all these new innovations, although that happens too. But anyway, my point here, and where I think why this is relevant to the work that some of you are taking on or are on the cusp of taking on, is that our instructional team especially in the semester where we took on design-based research, included research faculty or research and scholarship-oriented faculty like myself, clinical instructors, which are folks, boy, I have no idea what word that matches to in your world, but the instructors much more focused on teaching than on research. Then we have adjuncts, which I hear is called sessionals in your world, so I'm catching these on. And we had technology specialists, and we had graduate students. And so I've now been involved in this team over the course of, I think this is 12 semesters, 10 or 12 semesters, and with a lot of autonomy for innovation, but on the other hand, a lot of changing personnel. And the other reason why I include this list of personnel in part is because we had very different roles and very different almost attention spans, different reasons for paying attention to the course, different reasons for trying to do the work that we wanted to do. But this is, different agendas, I guess I would say, for the work we wanted to do. But this is how we looked over the course of several different semesters, including the ones where we were most involved in design-based research. So let me tell you a little bit about the team. I think this will, yeah, good. It's still stable. So we were an established institutional team. We were used to working together, instructing in, figuring out instruction together, figuring out design together, etc. We were already using collaborative organizational strategies to deliver multiple courses, course sections together, meeting different learning objectives, and we were taking all of these different teaching jobs, if you will, that we had and for different courses and combining them together in the idea that it was for the best interest of the student. We were used to having weekly team meetings. We do this still. We meet 2 hours every week as a group, no matter what our roles are. Again, research faculty, adjunct students, graduate students, etc., to try to carve out the course and to make sense of it and to continually improve it. And so that was a commitment we had already made, and also a commitment that we make flexibly in the sense that people at different times call into meetings or we use Zoom or other things. So it's not always face-to-face, but it is a pretty structured amount of time regularly to try to do best with our course. And to give you a sense of what we do, boy, I'm sorry, this is really in the weeds of teacher preparation for a minute, but we, in any given semester, we have 3 to 5 sections that are sometimes as many as 6 or 7 different sections that are face-to-face, and some of which are online, some of which are face-to-face. All of them are covering the same basic material, but some of them are focused for future middle grades teachers. Other sections of the course are for future 9th through 12th grade teachers, which have different content area expectations. And then there's a co-requisite technology course. So we had already developed a way of sharing our courses. So we would use, and I can't remember if I'm not sure this slide is in here, but for the short version of it, we use a Blackboard shell that is independent to our individual courses and whichever group of students that we're working with, but we share an assignment bank which is built into a Google Drive and which we all link to from our different shells. And so each week, each different assignment gets pushed out with different focus and learning process and assignments, etc., so that that's what we collaborate on, and then individually we teach on we teach to our particular students. Again, some of us online, some of us face-to-face, etc. But we have been very thoughtful about deciding how we want to share our instruction and where we want to let our individual teaching selves pop forward. We also have an established practice of doing a lot of ongoing feedback. That is an American gray squirrel down there on the left. We have a confessions page, and what we do is we have an open, anonymous place where students can give us feedback about the course all the time as we're teaching it, as they're moving through the different assignments, etc. And so we get feedback. It was already our practice to get this kind of feedback from them, for better or worse. I mean, good news and bad for that. But with the idea that we would continue, we've always focused on continually getting feedback, and that's part of our 2 hours of planning as well. What do we do with this? But in the interest of doing design-based research, we added in some pre-post assessments. So we reorganized things around modules. The modules, as you can see in each case, professional identity of teachers within the school and broader community. So a lot of work on demographics and social context. A second module on key moments on educational history, key ideas in ed psych, etc. And then finally, students working on a final research paper. And so we built assessments to go kind of on top of the class that were now going to be more for gathering data than for really assessing student knowledge, although the two worked hand in hand. And we tried 3 different pre-post assessments. Module 1, constructed response, was short answer writing on some very specific prompts related to professional identity. Module 2 uses selected response, so I believe multiple choice and true-false testing on key ideas. And then Module 3, we actually used a Likert scale survey, pre and post, in order to get students to indicate their level of confidence about the different work that we were asking them to do as they were completing a final research project. And so that meant, and you're not going to be able to see the one corner of the slides here, but that meant that in addition to other marking of students that we were doing, is we had to figure out something to do with how to make sense of the data that we had collected, because as you know, it's way easier to tell students to give you responses on things than it is to actually score or grade or code or otherwise do the data analysis of it. So we figured out a way to do co-scoring of the constructed responses. We were able to read, so basically we read short student works together, and we figured out a rating system to gather data on basically, did they learn the thing we wanted them to learn? Did they use in this case, the Texas standards, the Texas language for the kind of professional obligations that they wanted? And that was an intense thing to do together as a team and to score together as a team, but it gave us a lot of insight, kind of quick insight into whether students were understanding the key components we were trying. In the second module, because we were fairly exhausted from what we had done in the first module, and we realized we couldn't possibly keep up the co-scoring as we had done, we let Blackboard do the scoring. We created the assessment module, and we basically allowed the scores to speak for themselves. That meant that we had to work a lot harder at writing good questions, which was less fun than sort of open-ended constructed responses. But it did mean that we got back immediate feedback. So if you're thinking about what is the data I'm going to use to understand whether students are learning, letting Blackboard do some of the work is a very good idea. Although you can't see part of this slide, I think because of the window that we have open, the Likert survey that we used for the third module actually was the most directly allowed us to understand student confidence levels. So it was based on that the results of things like we asked them to self-assess, like I know how to use APA citations on the test, on the writing that I'm doing. I know how to cite the research I'm doing, or I know how to incorporate this. I know how. And we took that and we were able to get immediate feedback and say, oh, so they all think they know this thing. And then we, of course, had to find out if that was really true. But it did help us then at the end to see what kind of beliefs they had, dispositions they had doing the kind of research that we were asking them to do. And so we used all of those modules, all of those ideas, and all of that data, and we sort of plugged it in. As we were discussing in our meetings, we were always talking about design-based research, but in the end, at the end of especially the first semester, we tried to think about, well, what did we learn using that DBR model that Maria suggested? And so I will talk about that in a little more detail, but basically we discovered that when we went to analyze practical problems, which is the first step for DBR, we realized that we were problematizing our own practice. Again, for better or worse, we actually thought we were a pretty good team and thought we did pretty well with the work we were doing. And suddenly, by using this DBR lens, we were discovering, are we really asking the students to do the kind of work we wanted them to do? What is good about our practice, and how do we know? So that was hard, in a sense, to make trouble where we had been pretty self-satisfied, but it did lead to a fair number of insights. In terms of developing solutions, we were really interested in students thinking about collaboration and their own reflective habits. So sorry, I realize that's sort of nested one within the other. But we wanted our own students to have a sort of disposition for the kind of work we were also trying to do on our own. And so we realized we needed to revise existing assignments to more push towards the goals that even talking through our DBR process had caused us to realize, oh, maybe we don't know this as well as we thought we did. In the iterative cycles of testing and refinement, we had a lot of disagreements over measures. And there were disagreements within our own team about whether what we were using as a measure for gathering data was actually all that valuable. And then also data collection, which we were then trying to send on to the US prep team, where we were trying to say, hey, look, here's how good we are, here's where we're seeing students learning, and then they were saying, well, how do you even know that's a good measure of student learning, and back and forth and back and forth. So it was, those iterative cycles were painful, but that was where we were generating a lot of insights into our course. And finally, the reflections to produce design principles. This really did cause us to focus on what did we think were our design principles of our course? What did we really imagine were the best decision-making points we were following, and how we were deciding what tools to use, what we were doing in our meetings, what we could analyze in terms of student work, etc. So it was those reflections on design principles and what tools to use then led us back to, well, now what should we try next? So again, it continues to be rather messy. But let me go through those steps a little bit more, not so much specific to our context, but to give you a sense of some of the questions we found ourselves asking as we took on design-based research, and how these helped us improve our course, make our collaborative work more powerful, maybe even transformed. Certainly had some excellent changes, things that we were excited about that came out that I could talk about at length, but it was probably not particularly relevant to your world. The important part of the first stage, the analysis of practical problems, and actually Reeves says it's not stages, it's just, I mean, they're stages, but they're just processes that you work through, so think of it as an eternal spiral of some grand vision that I can't put on a two-dimensional slide. But anyway, So the key thing is that researchers and practitioners are thinking through these questions together. No matter whether you're an instructional designer, whether you're actually delivering the course, whether you're thinking about the impact on students or whatever, you have to be a part of the conversation about what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And so analysis includes kind of figuring out what do the external people think are your problems, and then what internally do you think are your problems. And when I say problems, I mean, where do we think student learning is insufficiently rigorous or insufficiently happening? What assumptions are we making about when and how learning happens? Pretty powerful question to ask about, what do we do, and is it, do they read some text and do they automatically learn, or how do we know? And then finally, within this stage, we were asking ourselves, are these really problems of practice? That is there anything we can do about the learning that we're either not seeing or which we're trying to do? Or for instance, in our case, because this was an introductory class, is there no way they're going to learn more than about this much at this level? Are they going to need further learning in further classes? And is there anything practically that we can do about it to help? In terms of developing solutions, we found that we needed to really reflect a lot on what tools we were using and what tools we were asking students to use in order to express what they had learned. And I could go into a lot of detail about that, but basically how we were asking students to communicate their learning and the tools we were choosing to do that. We use many different digital tools, and what they chose to use and what we chose for them to use had all sorts of implications for solutions. The question also we asked, what do we know about how we each collaboratively go about our work, ended up being significant, and then again and again, what promises do innovations hold for us? What can they offer? For iterative cycles of testing and refinement, the question, as I said, often was timing is everything. Anyone in the room who is regularly instructing over the course of a semester know that time goes by very quickly, and just when you know exactly what students need or what they don't understand, they're pretty much out the door and let the next group in or whatever. So to even figure out where to place these iterative cycles was always a challenge. That's why we ended up with the modules that we used. I don't know that that's really the answer, but it was one solution we were able to find. So we were asking ourselves questions like, when should we be able to know the impact of our changes on student learning? How do we measure those changes? What do we pay attention to so that we say, oh yeah, they didn't know this and now they know this, and here's how we're sure that they've gained this knowledge. And then the eternal question, what do we do with our data? You know the expression buckets of data. We discovered that we already had buckets of data and we gained more buckets of data. But what one does with those is not always so obvious or easy. And that metaphor falls apart eventually. And then, so again, back to the reflections to design, to produce design principles are the questions again and again. What are students learning? What are we learning? And what do we need to try next? And that was, for us, in working through design-based research, that question, what do we need to try next, was both very helpful, but also sometimes exhausting. Because it was never clear that, like, oh, now this is a perfect course. And no matter how much data we could send about student improvement to our external folks, we knew where there were still gaps or holes or other issues that we weren't sure about. So this afternoon, in a sort of workshop setting, we'll talk through those stages further and see if they're relevant to or can help you thinking about your own revisions and the kinds of questions that design-based researchers have taken on following these different processes. Again, I should have some sort of fancy arrow showing that, starts over and over again, but the workshop itself will only be for an hour, whatever it is, and I promise we'll stop more than anything else. I think a few final things that we really discovered that are probably worth thinking about, especially if you're an instructor in this case. one, and you get caught up in design-based research and all these iterative cycles. One is that students don't care that this is something new and different, because for them it's always new and different. They're in their class for the first time, and we found ourselves sometimes explaining changes to students and then realized you don't need to know this, because this is what we need to know about why we're trying these things, but which are not good. So the expression in the US is people are guinea pigs, not that they are guinea pigs, but if you, I love guinea pigs. I'm saying nice things about guinea pigs here, but in the experimental session where one might experiment on them, students don't want to be reminded, was our experience, that they don't want to be reminded that they are guinea pigs and that maybe we're not delivering to them the